We talked a little bit about some of the components of what a strategic planning system is all about.
And one of the things that we believe that is very important is for us to take a look at the respective environments that we operate in.
So today we're going to learn about personality, the differences of personalities, and about relationships.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the HUD OCIO learning session. I'm Dr. Melanie Cohen, and today we have a really terrific topic. It's called Generating Energy, Creativity, and Performance in Tough Times. So we are very, very fortunate to have with us today Dr. Lynne Sedgemore. She's coming to us directly from her office in the UK. And let me tell you a little bit about Lynne. I'm just going to give you the highlights. She has a tremendous amount of accomplishments, but I'm just going to give you a few of the key things. So Lynne is the executive director of the 157 group of FE colleges, which is a national policy think tank and lobbying organization on skills and vocational education. She was a member of the Prime Minister's UK National Review of Public Sector Leadership and has chaired and sat on numerous national and ministerial public sector committees and advisory groups. She was also awarded the honor of Commander of the British Empire by the Queen in 2004 for services for further education. And very recently, just last month as a matter of fact, she was named as one of the UK's most influential people in the 2015 Debrett's 500 list. So we're very fortunate to have her with us today. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a second about what she's going to do is give us some practical ways, which is what we always try to do here at the learning session, is give practical ways in which we can add energy, creativity, and performance, and how we can foster that in our own organizations. So with that, Lynne, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you again for being with us.
Hello, hi there, Melanie, and thank you for letting me share some of my thoughts and ideas. Absolutely delighted, and I really hope you find them of value. I've been a chief exec since 1998. I'm in my third chief exec role, and a senior manager since 1984. So I've had quite a long time to play, in the best sense, with organisations. And I don't know about you folks, but I like to enjoy myself at work. I'm a public sector, I'm a servant of, I'm paid by the state in terms of vocational education, but I think it's also important that I'm accountable and generate high performance. And I like to be creative. So these are the three themes I'm going to share with you in a very practical way, the way that I think things have worked. Next slide. Basically, I've put this up because I think, for me, a major question is individually and collectively, can we begin to create and experience richer, dynamic, creative, and more meaningful work lives? And I believe I'm on the planet very much to enable people within their workplaces to actually in the UK is very much as I've listed here. Next slide. We're having to big deficits in the sector, complicated with, and a whole range of things, including new quality. In the vocational education sector, with hits after the election, which is in May this year, of between 20 and 60%. So if we don't do something really drastic, our service quality and quantity is going to almost disappear. Next slide. That's, yeah. I also just want to, I'm not going to talk you through these, but I think it's important to understand, particularly around Generation Y, Generation X, and the millennials, that work motivations are changing. And I think there is a bigger sense of people wanting meaning and purpose, particularly in tough times, work-life balance being important, which might actually be hard to achieve. But there is also a young group of people coming through the system who want to give back and change the world. Next slide. And I want to draw on Gary Hamel's quote, "The old management models are dragging current business performance, and we have to change the way we change." Next slide. I am a huge fan, this is Gandhi, I'm sure you've heard this quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And I really, and my research has evidenced this using Lovinger ego state and Bill Torbert's work, if you've come across that the state of being of a leader in organizations really influences the field of the organization and what can be done and what can happen. And recent work around emerging futures, Otto Scharman's U theory and others. If you haven't come across those, you might be interested. On the next slide, I'm going to share my hypothesis, which is that leaders with high levels of energy foster cultures and work environments of creativity, high motivation and satisfaction. And this enables high performance, innovation, and inevitably a strong competitive edge. And I think those three do go together. Next slide. I think a major issue that's being looked at HR at the moment is very much the notion of discretionary energy. And that's very much that we all bring our energy to work and we have contractual arrangements as employees, but we can choose give, and that's the discretionary energy. And for a lot of people, that's not about pay. It really isn't. It's much more about where their passion lies, how they're motivated, what really gets them up and out of bed in the morning and lets them go home with their soul singing and a smile on their faces. Next slide. My premise, one of my previous jobs was the chief executive of our national leadership centre for vocational education. And over the 4 years that I was in that job, 40,000 leaders from our sector came through. So I learned a lot from them. But the one thing that I did learn is that leadership is relational. That the way in which we're a team, we hand the batons on, we can only win this race or whatever it is we're doing if we're there in a collegiate manner and the energy is discretional. So if we go to the next slide, I'm not going to spend time, but this is something that you might want to do by yourselves. Name someone who most energizes you and think about how they do energize you. And perhaps if you can, name 3 qualities they personify that energize you the most. And you may also want to ask other people to do this on you. You get some really interesting answers if you do. And on the next slide, I share my own version of this. I've got a sample on the slide of the leaders who most energize me. And when that comes up, you'll see that these are leaders who, the 3 qualities for me are service, love, and humility.
So, Lynne, let me ask you a question. So, you know, it's very interesting because leadership is really the key to everything, I think. You know, without the proper leadership in place, things don't work that well. But what happens when you have an energized leader, but you have a less than energized workforce? You know, because you can only do so much there, and that happens in a lot of organizations every day around the world. So how do you begin to pull in those motivational factors to begin to change that workforce?
Okay, I think it's through dialogue. I genuinely think it's through dialogue. What you don't want is a leader who's high energy, who's irritating the rest of the workforce, and you're not in a tune or in alignment with the energetic field of the organization. Now, the way that that's worked for me is I ask people why they're feeling so low in energy.
And do you find that they're honest with you when you ask them?
One of the things that I've always been able to do is have authentic dialogue with people. Mm-hmm. And they tell you what is irritating them. They tell you what they're fed up about. They tell you what is making them feel demotivated. And then for me, the key is to actually work on those things, see who's in whose control they are, if you like, or who has the most influence over them, and work together to release those blockages, those de-energizers, and to shift the organizational field. And what I have found works is several people will come along with that because it's worked for them, and then others see that happen. And it's a bit like it's contagious, if you like. Then people start to go, hey, I can trust this person. It's a real dialogue, and the energy starts to lift.
Oh, okay. So we have a question from the audience, Lynne.
Do you find that those interactions really need to happen on a one-on-one or in small groups rather than the traditional kind of town hall talking to the workforce structure?
Okay, I think that's a really good question. I have always used all of them. I think there is a time if you have big announcements that you may want to bring all the staff together. We call them surgeries, which is a horrible name, but that's what we call them. Where I would be in my office at a particular time. I had an open door office policy, by the way, so people could come in and chat at any time. But I also had periods where I'd say I'm sitting in a certain place. Sometimes it was my office, sometimes it was staff rooms. It was in different spaces that felt safer for different people. And people would come in and talk to me about it. We had a box that people could put suggestions in, so they could do it anonymously or with their names, and we did it sometimes. I would talk to groups of staff, curriculum teams or functional teams. I mean, I am an extrovert. I love people, so it's easy for me as a leader to actually talk to people, engage with them, have conversations. But I think you need to do all of them personally, and I don't go with the issue that there isn't enough time to do that. I actually think can't afford not to do it.
Okay, great. I think we'll have other questions from the audience, but just continue on, because I think what we have is really, in a lot of instances, morale issues in organizations. And, you get a new leader, often get new leaders, and they come in with certain levels of energy, but the people are sometimes not as energized because they've seen a lot and they've been through a lot, and they're just not sure what's so new now. And so they have to be brought along. But you're going to tell us a little bit about some practical ideas and techniques and how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we can just show the next slide, which is my leaders, and then we can move on from that. Is that going to come up? Yeah. So these are the leaders who inspire me, and you'll see they're mostly spiritual leaders, but they inspire me. So if we go on to the next slide, I think it's beginning to actually answer some of those questions. Mm-hmm. For me, the leadership attributes that really work is who you are. It's the nature of your character. I think that's the most important. And I've worked in organisations where new chief execs have come in and there's been cynicism. And it's mostly been about the state of their ego, if they're more interested in their own career paths or they're genuinely interested in serving the organisation. Mm-hmm. I think then it's your actions. I think people measure you and will be energised or not by what you actually do. Then I think it's what you say, and the way in which you communicate that. And actually, this last one I think should run down the side. It's exactly what you're saying. It's how they feel. And I think emotional intelligence and all that work about resonance leadership by Daniel Goleman is useful here, because at the end of the day, it's how people feel in the organization in terms of their energy levels, their sense of loyalty, their creativity, and their performance. And one of the things that's often, I'm not perfect by any means, but one of the things that's often said to me, you know what, whatever else, we know you care. You care about the students, you care about the stuff, and you want the best for everybody. So I think it's an issue. So if we go to the next slide, these are the kinds of questions that I think are important for any leader to be able to answer for themselves. Because I think that core question, why should anyone be led by you? And I don't think formal hierarchy and power is enough.
Right.
There's informal power, there's resource power, there's all different kinds of power. But to rely on hierarchical power alone, I think, is a huge mistake. And I think if you can answer these questions, and it doesn't matter what level of the organisation you're at, that these kinds of reflections help to co-create a high energy, high creative, high performing organisations. And these are quite pertinent questions. And I think if it really matters to you to come to work every day and do the things that you're doing, and that you really tap into your genuine, unrehearsed passion and energy for, I'm not somebody who believes in, you know, the language of vision and values as a rhetoric, and lack of congruence, I think, is the biggest energy killer in any organisation. And I think a big question is also, how do you balance rewarding people and performance? What is it that you do actually reward, and how do you support the creativity and healing and energy of other people? So I think not everyone, you should never presume that anybody wants to be led by you. And again, looking at the next slide, very simple,
Lynne,
I think as a really authentic leader, you need to know yourself. And if you go to the next slide, it's literally, if you haven't come across the book by Gareth Jones, Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? He talks about being yourself, being authentic with skill. Okay. So I think that's the issue in energy. It's closely related to authenticity, dialogue, understanding what people are feeling, what the blockages are, and how you release that energy. And I haven't met a single person who didn't want to feel passionate and energetic about their work.
Lynne, I agree with you completely. I don't think anybody comes to work to say, I'm going to come and do really nothing. Everybody, I think, comes and wants to do their best job. And I think sometimes what happens is something is askew between what the leader is bringing and what the person is doing and how they feel they're contributing. And so what I really love is what you just presented on those questions. I think if leadership teams, and I kind of use leadership loosely, but leadership like the head of the organization or people that actually are supposed to lead other people, if they actually got together and used those 7 questions, then I think that it would be very insightful for them to be able to get a little bit of more perspective on themselves. And I don't think people have that much of a perspective of themselves. So, and we also have another question from the audience for you, okay?
You mentioned,
Yep.
You mentioned how important it is to reward creativity. And in most organizations, particularly in a government organization where it is very bureaucratic and hierarchical, creativity is not necessarily valued so much. And so there's a lot of risk to the employee, if you will, in being creative, because breaking new ground in an organization like that is risky behavior. And so to a degree, I think the leader is kind of on a catch-22. They've got to separate without rewarding the person for taking the risk, even if it didn't go quite the way they had hoped. And so you can't necessarily just pin everything on rewarding the result, because sometimes that creative behavior, takes a try or two before you achieve the outcome you had really hoped. So is there a way to reward the creative action as separate from the outcome of that action?
Yeah. I totally agree with you there. And in my last job, I did work to the British civil servant and understood that bureaucratic mindset. I have to say, BIS, the business department in England, has got creative spaces, has developed a process by which they do encourage people to be innovative and creative and look at what happened if it didn't quite work out. So that there is an understanding that, with the best will in the world, this was done for the right reasons. They took a risk, they experimented, and we accept that actually didn't quite work out, but we are adult and sensible about it, and we unpack it and reflect on it in a manner from which we learn from that. So it's not a blame culture. I think the way that has come about is in small incremental steps. I think you can't go within a bureaucracy from being very risk averse to suddenly everybody's doing mega big, spectacular failing. So I think it's about sensible incremental steps, perhaps starting in some safe ground, and also, if you like, negotiating the kind of baseline of the contract when you set out on the project. That this is an arena, because we're doing that with lesson observations and experimentation in further education colleges at the moment, and saying to teachers, well, where is there a space where you can take some risk, but it isn't going to damage anything, but at the same time, if it doesn't work 100%, it's okay, and we can learn from it. But I do think you need leaders at every level of the organisation whose mindset gets that and accommodates with that. You can't have a process for creativity and innovation if it isn't living inside people and they get it. Do you see what I mean?
Right, right. Yeah,
It has to be
absolutely.
coming- Yeah. Okay, nice to be able to see you folks for a few minutes. I can actually see 3 people.
Oh, okay, very good. So you're seeing our audience. Okay, terrific.
Yeah. Okay, shall we move on?
Yes.
I just want to, I can see me now. Okay, next slide. Again, I don't want to rest on that slide, just some nice quotes about creativity. And what I've chosen is quotes that are different angles, not perhaps your traditional creativity. Go to the next slide, and can I just play with you for a few minutes? Let's just have a bit of fun. Can you write down at least 3 to 6 benefits for our customers, right? We're an airline company, and we're thinking differently about benefits for our customers. Just can you write down 3 or as many as you can think of in just a couple of minutes, benefits for our customers if we actually introduce passenger seats sitting on the wings of a plane? Just a bit of fun. Have a go. Have a go. And these need to be benefits. Have a go. If it
Fresh
works.
air, yeah.
Reduced risk of catching a disease. You're not trapped in the
Right.
box with
Right.
not catching a cold. What else?
Maybe no check
Getting off the
baggage
plane
fees.
faster.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a
debarking
good
faster.
one.
Nice. Yeah.
Maybe no check baggage fees because you can.
I hear a
just
lot
bring
of
your
I hear a
bag
lot of
right on the
ideas
wing.
coming out.
Yeah, no bag.
Okay, can we just share some? Just throw some suggestions out, what they are.
Yeah, great view. You get a lot of fresh air. Reduced chances of catching a cold.
Yeah,
Getting off the
lots of leg room.
Yeah, getting off the plane faster, and
Yeah.
no baggage fees.
Anybody else?
No, we all kind of had one list.
They all work together.
Okay. So shall we move on then?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Let's go to the next slide then. I mean, basically, if you can see that, this is just an exercise of something that's apparently really silly, but you're actually thinking of what the benefits are. Yeah, loads of leg room, it can be comfortable, you can smoke, possibly, time flies on the airline when you're unconscious. Actually, when I've done this with groups, people have come up anything to like 20 benefits of it. And some people just can't think of any, yeah? So this is really just about what we need is to be able to play in our minds, in creativity, to just think the unthinkable or to reframe things or actually just look at it. So if we go to the next slide,
let me just, Lynn, let me just mention one thing about that, because that's really interesting. Because what happens is when we get groups of people together, they almost have the problem is so defined in a box that it doesn't actually allow for a lot of creativity.
Yeah.
Because in a way, sometimes the answer is sort of given to you and you have to work within the confines of the problem and a proposed answer. And then that sort of cuts off the creativity a little bit. So, just using these kind of exercises, I think, can help people in organizations begin thinking before they actually are presented a problem.
Yeah, absolutely, because particularly in bureaucratic institutions, we're taught and we exercise linear thinking, so we get really good at it. So to move outside of that can be quite difficult. I mean, the way I've worked, and again, most of my organisations, they haven't been particularly non-bureaucratic ones, is to actually, I used to say, I still say, we create oases for ourselves so that the organisational culture might be that all the agendas are linear, but that we ourselves do something different. And whether that was when I was a base grade lecturer with a team of 6 people, or a dean of the business school, or a vice principal, I think you can do it within the culture of your own team, wherever you are in an organisation. I honestly, and people go to me, oh, it's all right, you're a chief executive. And I said, but I wasn't always. And I was doing those sorts of things when I was really, at the bottom of the organisation, if you take the hierarchical perspective.
Right.
So it's generating that. And my teams have always said, oh, we get energy. It's great coming to these meetings. And there's always a reluctant few, but you don't ridicule them for that. You honour what they still bring to it as well.
Right. That's a great comment. We have another question from the audience.
One of the issues I found, particularly when the organization is presented with a new challenge or a new function that they've never had to address before, and if it doesn't fit nicely within the silos of the functions as the organizational structure has been defined, there's a real stress about how we're going to deal with this, because part of it belongs to this group and part of it belongs to that group, and how are we going to make this work? So I think one of the keys is being able to create some structure within the organization, whether it's an ad hoc work team, whether it's a council, however you do it, you got to create a place for that creativity and that result to happen. And that often doesn't happen in an organized way, and then no one wants to take that risk to go out and start something moving.
I totally agree, and I think that's where project teams can come in. I don't know what you call them in the States. We call them ask and finish teams. So it's not a committee. It's something that's set up with a different set of rules. Mm-hmm. It's an ad hoc group, or it's a task and finish group, or it's a cross-disciplinary or cross-departmental project group. It doesn't matter what it's called, but essentially it's a group that has different baselines, and ideally somebody is being wise somewhere, and the leader of that team or the facilitator of that team is somebody who knows how to generate a kind of creative ethos or atmosphere, or there's at least, you know, a critical mass of people who are up for doing it differently.
And I think that's really a key. You can't just create the group, but you have to have someone seated in the group who has that high energy, who's willing to lead them in taking that creative risk.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other thing that people who do this work, you know, an internal change agent, you know, whatever, you also have to be able to take a lot of flack. And you have to be able to carry cynicism, and it doesn't get you down. You know, Napoleon said, leaders are dealers in hope, you know, and I think there is something about, without being obnoxiously, irritatingly hopeful, which drives some cynics mad, and that has been said about me. It's like, oh, just go away, you're just so tiggerish, you know, as in Winnie the Pooh. And I buy that, I get that. So there's something about you're able to stay with the energy and the passion despite a lot, and then gradually people going, you know what? And people will follow results, won't they? If they see things changing or happening or different for the better as they perceive it, then I think people will come on board. That's been my experience, and it takes longer and lesser times. You just have to keep believing in what you're doing, I think.
That's right.
So we can just go to the next slide. The next couple are just a list of practical solutions of how you foster creativity in the workshop. There was one before, actually, that was about processes and things, but we'll go with this one. Creative spaces, de bono exercises, because these are all a bit probably too far away from your culture at the moment. Can we go back a slide? That's it. I think these are the more traditional ways, fostering team creativity and ethos that we just talked about, introducing creative processes, a no-blame culture, and fostering an organisational creativity culture. Go back to the other slides, and those were more specific things. So next slide, that were there as well. A book's just been written on my last organisation. It's called Spiritual Leadership in Action by Jodie Fry and Jochen and Altman. And we did a tremendous amount of generating a very high energy, high creative organisation, and we did all these sorts of things. But it took a couple of years before we got there, because I think some people would just have run out of the organisation if they'd come in and been asked to sing or do Outward Bound or whatever. So I think you have to align it with where people are at. The next one is just a quote that I'll leave you with. The next slide is about successes and failures should both be lauded, and acknowledging failure. I'm aware of time, so if we go on to the next one.
Lynn, before we go on to the next one, I think that, you know, let's just talk for a minute about failure. Not that, you know, that's something we're striving for. We're certainly not striving for failure. But one of the things is, if you don't take a chance, it's about taking chances and risks. And the idea is, if you don't fail occasionally, you really haven't learned anything. And so I love this idea about celebrating both success and failure. You know, you may have tried, it didn't quite work, but you try something again. But if you're not at least acknowledged for trying that the first time, it's unlikely you're going to get people to try things a second, third, or 10th time.
Absolutely. And if you look at most entrepreneurs, if not all entrepreneurs in particular, they've had huge failures. Inventors, they've all had huge failures. I do a module in universities on the wisdom of failure, actually. And people love it, because you look at just how much failure has taken place for successful people. Einstein didn't wake up with his theory of relativity just in his head one morning. You know, it's after Einstein with his light bulb and all of that. So I think, and somebody said it earlier from the audience, there are really complex issues that we are facing in the 21st century. These are things, in high spirits and others, they're things that require adaptive responses, not technical responses. If we could have sorted them, we would have done, but we're stuck. In England, we use the term wicked issues. Keith Grint came up with it. They're issues that are so complex, they require completely different ways of dealing with them. And so unless we're up for that, and of course some of those are going to fail initially. We're in whole new territory that we haven't been in before.
Right.
Yeah?
Oh, yes. And so something else from the audience.
When you're in an era of, as the title of the presentation was, in an era of constrained resources, or, it takes a lot of courage on the part of management to be willing to support failure, because in a way, the risk to the organization is higher because our resources are constrained. And so you really have to strike a balance between, containing that, but still encouraging it to a degree so that you don't stifle the creativity for the wicked issues. But you know that you only have so much resources and you can only afford so much failure.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. And everything I'm saying is, if you like, it needs to be proportional to the organisation and appropriate to the culture while still pushing at the edges.
Absolutely.
And I agree with you, but I also say, at a time of austerity and limited resources, don't we get to the point where we think, you know what, we will have a go and we'll try things, because actually we're getting fed up of death by 1,000 cuts, and we are less and less and less, So actually it can also give a platform for more courage out of a bit of desperation, if you like, or despair.
Nothing could be worse than what we...
also a window.
Nothing could be worse than what we're doing today,
Yeah. I was with a group of 20 principals in Yorkshire yesterday. If we're going to get 60% cuts in the next couple of years, we've got to do things really differently. And can you afford not to take those risks? So I think austerity, it's two-sided.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to just end with performance. So if we do 2 slides in, one of the things that interests me is that, so next slide, if at a time of austerity, we often go for target approaches, and a research by the Work Foundation in England actually showed very clearly that it's outstanding leaders, particularly in a time of difficulty, are focused on sustainable performance, purpose and meaning through the people, and have a deeply connective philosophy. Because this, when you're really tired of everything and it just feels like it's really too difficult, people need something to hang on to. And if a leader is displaying a philosophy that people can connect with, and that's back to authenticity, that does have an impact. The next slide, I just want you to put up, but we won't go through, which is my own connective philosophy as a CEO. We haven't got time to go into that, but that's just, when people ask me where I'm coming from, and further education, by the way, is community colleges in the States. That's where I'm really coming from. And on the next slide, again,
hey, Lynne,
I've got...
Lynne, I just want to talk about one thing on your personal philosophy.
Okay, great.
Because I think is really key, is the idea that leadership's a collective relational activity. So I often talk about leadership as not the person at the top of the pyramid. Anybody could be a leader. But the idea of this shared leadership, I think, is really important. And that's a lot of new thinking in leadership. Can you talk about that for just a minute?
Absolutely. As a CEO, I think my role is first amongst equals, if you like. That we're all equals, but I do have a formal role as a CEO with particular roles, but so does everybody else. and that leadership is everywhere in the organization. The issue is whether you choose to exercise it or not, if you feel able to exercise it or not. And actually, you have people who lead who are not in formal roles. One of the first things I ask when I go into a new organisation is, tell me who the key influencers are in this organisation. And they go, oh, you mean the senior management team? I go, no, I mean the people who really influence in this place. You always get a list of about 10 people. And these are everybody from the caretaker to, in our case, a lecturer, perhaps to a senior leader, but not always, because they exercise leadership wherever they are. So to me, leadership and followership, and the other thing is, I don't think you can be a good leader if you're not a good follower. If you don't know how. And I'm really clear that there are times in my organisation when I am led by other people because they know better than I do on that particular issue. Right. And then I become a team player as well. So, and that's actions. It's all right me saying, oh, it's distributed. But if I'm still playing the big almighty chief exec from the top down, then it's not true, is it? So I think you have to be able to live distributed leadership as a follower as well. So I'm
exactly.
really meaning that. Yeah. Okay, so the next slide is just some questions that I live with again, because these questions are for everybody. How do you articulate your connective philosophy? And how can you live that philosophy to inspire and energize others? I think if we go to the next slide, this is just me laying out, just put them all in. The Centre for Excellence in Leadership, which was my last organisation before this one. This is a summary, keep going, it's not finished yet. This is a summary, that's it, of how I actually think we lived, and it's a we, energy, if you like, the ECP leadership processes, yeah? This is how we did it. The other thing that I think is important in an ECP organisation is fun, is play. And when the researchers came into our organisation, they were stunned by the amount of play and humour that was taking place in the organisation alongside the passion. So again, that's just the way in which it's about the whole organisational approach, yeah? So somebody used to say to me, oh, you just like somebody who just like going having fun and you do silly things in the organisation. And I said, that's so rude and disparaging. You know, we have a whole organisational approach, which I think this tries to explain. If we skip the next 3 slides, just leave them up for a few minutes, because what they are is just me showing off the bottom line of that organisation to say that what this resulted in. So the next slide, those are just showing you, and in a nutshell, our target was 1,500 over 3 years, and we brought 40,000 through in 4 years, and we reduced the cost massively. So if you go on to the next slide, because we're coming to the end, folks, and this is the point that somebody just raised. This is about at little or no cost. What I've highlighted here is what were the things that we did that virtually didn't cost anything, yeah? So that was our values, our mindsets, the way we cared and supported for each other. Again, back to that point, Melanie, distributed leadership was encouraged at every single level. Right. Radical trust. I think there's something about believing in abundance. This is extreme theory Y. If you know theory X is you don't trust anybody, theory Y is you do. We were very theory Y. Constant learning and feedback. Passion. We had no status symbols in our open plan office at all. It just was, we were peers working together, but we still had respect for our hierarchical roles and functions. Performance and values were both appraised, and lots of bottom-up task groups, yeah, that were established to deal with things. The next slide is what we did that did cost. Yeah, so I think that's the slide. What did cost was coaching and mentoring, enabling these creative activities. So we did away days and things, and yes, they did cost. Creating succession and career opportunities that were based on being creative and energetic, having a bonus system, strategic forums. We democratized strategy. The civil servants at this point thought I'd gone completely bonkers, but we did actually bring in a consultant to democratize strategy. That had huge impact on our strategic, improving our strategic understanding. Everybody had access to self-awareness diagnostic tools, dignity at work. We did create beautiful spaces, and the development of both professional and inner life was encouraged. 2 more slides. So the next slide is just, you could fill this in for yourself. That's the one that I showed earlier. How might ECP leadership look for you in your organisation? So it's how would you fill that in the way that I filled in the one for Cell. And I'll just end on the next slide with a quote. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Boldness has genius, power and magic in it. Begin it now. And I think I want to end on that note.
Okay, well, I think that was terrific. I don't know if our audience has any more questions for you. It doesn't look like it. Oh, well, yes, we have one more question. This will be our final question for you because we're getting close on time. So go ahead.
So what are the major roadblocks to creating a creative organization?
I can't actually hear. Sorry, can you say that a bit louder?
The question is, what are some of the major roadblocks to creating a creative organization?
Okay, just to let you know, the environment I have worked in has got bankers in it, accountants in it, engineers in it, construction people in it. So people who I love dearly, but whose mindsets are not necessarily this kind of experimental, wacky stuff that some of them might see. So I think the roadblocks for some people is that they don't know how to shift their mindset. They need help in it. So they are caught in a way that has served them well, that has huge value, that is perhaps more linear, and now changing. And that's painful and it's scary, and well, why should I? So spending lots of time explaining why we think this stuff matters, and then evidencing how it's made a difference. And by the way, not everybody has to engage with this in the organisation. There are parts of the organisation it's not appropriate for. I'm not sure you want all this going on in your finance office all the time. Yeah?
Yeah.
Right.
Having said that, I've got a lovely story about African drumming making sure all our invoices got in, but that's another day. I think the processes of the organisation, particularly in bureaucracies, that people are wedded to because they've worked in the past. I think there has to be some kind of tipping point in an organisation where these kind of ways feel more appropriate than the old, but people will hang on to the old, it's the classic change process. So I think it's very much about evidencing what works. So when I was Dean of the Business School in 1989, we did collective thinking days. The bankers and the accountants, they wouldn't come. They just wouldn't come. But within 2 years, the first time we did them, out of 68 staff, I think we had 20 staff, but within 2 years, we had 100% staff. We never forced people to come. We made them happen. And then it was like, well, hang on, that's the place to be. And gradually everybody engaged. Yeah. So I haven't the HR people and the marketeers were keen, the others weren't. So I have worked a lot with people whose sense of this is rubbish. Yeah. People often go, this is rubbish. This is nonsense, probably a more accurate word. They just don't want to engage with it. And you just have to keep at it and evidence that it has some value. What I don't think you ever do is attack people and make them feel inadequate or worse, then they're feeling bad enough already. They don't need another problem dumped on them that they're creating. It's much more those blockages, and I think you need to change those processes gradually as well.
Okay.
But my organisations have always had a healthy audit, have always come through any external evaluation and impact. Your core processes have to be in place, your appraisal processes, your monitoring processes. So all of those things, you have a strong base and then you build up from those, yeah? So I don't know if that's exactly answering your question, but my feel is you win people over. You bring them with you. You don't criticise them or attack them. You show them why it's got worth and value.
Right. No, I think that was exactly the answer. And again, I want to thank you for being with us today, because I think this was a terrific session. I think everybody learned a lot today, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time from your schedule to do this for us. So with that, I thank you very much. And for our audience, I look forward to seeing you at the next HUD OCIO learning session. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for your questions and your interest. Happy journey, whatever you go on to do next.
Thank you. Bye.